America, a land of extremes. I'm in Auckland right now, and I think most people, most everyone really would agree that New Zealand is more progressive than the United States. Europe is more progressive than the US, Australia, etc. They would see definitely the US as the most conservative country in the developed world, and that is actually true. Like if you see by virtually every metric, except for maybe like Switzerland or some countries in Eastern Europe, America is just more conservative. And people in America on average are also more conservative. But I want to point out that America is actually very unique in a particular sense. America is a land of extremes, yeah, but it goes both ways. And there's many ways you can see that. Just because the U.S. population is so spread out, and there's so many different states, and the states are so big, and the U.S. itself is so big. I mean, the U.S. population-wise and size-wise isn't too different from Europe in a sense. There's many states in the U.S. that have populations much larger than countries in Europe. And if you take abortion, for example, most of the developed world allows for abortion until like at least 10 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes 14 weeks, 15. So it's normally within that range where you can just get an abortion for no matter what reason. And there's plenty of states in the US that fit into that criteria where they get into that middle ground where it's like 10, 12, well, actually Roe v. Wade, I mean, 10, 12, 15 weeks. Uh, and obviously there are states where it's full out banned, like Texas or Alabama or Mississippi or whatever. I wouldn't know the states by heart. But one extreme that we normally don't talk about is how there's virtually no place in the world where abortion is allowed uh, until like 24, 25 weeks, like say in California or in Colorado, or where there's just no ban. Like if you look at a map right now on Wikipedia or wherever you want to look, there are certain states in the U.S. where there's no rule on how late you can abort, or where the rule is 22 weeks, 24 weeks, 25 weeks, or point of viability, which is normally considered 22 weeks or something. Uh, and so even though the US on average is more conservative, because it's so divided, there's blocks that are by far more progressive than pretty much any country on earth. Like if you're in France, France is a very progressive country. It's the first country to have abortion as a right in their constitution. Like that is crazy. That is crazy. But if you think about it, uh, even France is more conservative on abortion than many U.S. states. I can Google it right now, but I'm kind of lazy. You Google it. France's abortion law is much more conservative than California's, than New York's, and uh, obviously abortion is a very important issue. But it isn't just abortion. If you take income tax, for example, if you live in Florida, in Texas, wherever, a no income tax state, the U.S. has actually pretty low taxes, and the U.S. tax system is quite progressive, so you have to be earning a significant amount of money for you to actually be paying like a lot of income tax. And uh, in most countries, even like in Europe or in Australia or New Zealand, whatever, you'd be paying more tax than you'd be paying in terms of total tax than you'd be paying in most U.S. states. But again, if you're in a high tax state, then you could be paying on top of your federal income tax uh, 8, 9, 13% of your income in state taxes, which makes for a much bigger percentage of your total income going into taxes, which is nearly, though not exactly, the same as many European countries paying taxes. So you see that you can kind of have your cake and eat it too if you're American, because you could go, like if you're diehard redneck conservative, you could really go uh, to, I don't know, Atlanta, Georgia, or uh, I don't know, South Dakota or something, or Wyoming, and you'll be home. Like there would be no more conservative place on the face of the earth. But I really do believe that we forget to talk about the other side as well, which is it's hard to find a more progressive city than say New York or San Francisco or LA. And it's not just hard to find it in America, it's also hard to find it in the world because even with gun restrictions, despite the Second Amendment, there are limitations on gun ownership in said states. Like I said, abortion law in those states is vastly different. Before gay marriage was legalized nationwide, there were plenty of states that legalized it before. If you even look at weed, The U.S. is one of the most conservative countries in the world. Uh, there are plenty of states in the U.S. that don't legalize weed, that haven't even decriminalized weed. But uh, Colorado, a few years back, was one of the first legislations in the world to actually thankfully legalize weed, you know. And obviously, there's many more states in the U.S. that have legalized weed now. But if you look at Australia or New Zealand, that are typically very, very progressive, New Zealand hasn't legalized weed. Australia has, but only in like the ACT, Canberra, some other places, whatever. But it's not legalized as of 2025 across the board. And even in Europe, there, there's like two countries in Europe where weed is legalized, whereas like in the States, it's like 20 states where it's legalized. So you can see how the U.S. system works and how it's meant to work is people think differently and they're allowed to uh, apply different legislation and limit things they want to limit and not limit things they don't want to limit. And that comes across as like a lot of decentralization, but also under one American unity, you know, because you're still American. You could be born in Alaska and end up in Hawaii if you'd like. And those are vastly different places, well, they're extremely different places, nature-wise, you know. Or you could be born in Texas and wind up in California, and those are uh, places that are different somewhat in the weather, but not so much. But they're very, very different politically. And so you can see how the U.S. is a one-size-fits-all kind of scenario, just because it's so diverse geographically, economically, culturally, and politically that the probability that if you're in one of the extremes, the best place for you is in the US is actually quite high. If you're a fucking diehard commie progressive, Hawaii could be for you, California could be for you, Oregon could be for you. If you're a diehard redneck, like I said, Wyoming could be for you, whatever other red state you want to go to. If you want to chill and smoke weed, but also have guns, you could go to New Hampshire. If you wanted to smoke weed but have some more of a more restrictive gun law, you could go to California. If you think abortion is evil, you could go to Texas. If you think abortion is fucking amazing, you could go to I don't know Colorado. And like there's everything in between, everything in between. In a way where even though obviously the EU has countries in it, so it's by definition more decentralized than the US because countries can actually leave and there's a lot of more autonomy, fiscal autonomy, and there's more autonomy within the EU than there is within the US, obviously. But legislation across US states, taxes across US states, just general policy across US states might actually vary more than all those things, policy, etc., legislation across EU countries. Like most EU countries have a very similar approach to weed. Most of them have a very similar approach to abortion in terms of how far late you can be until you get an abortion, which is what 12 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks at most. And when you go issue by issue, guns, there's a lot more similarity in the way the EU in general countries approach guns than U.S. states approach guns. And it's amazing that even though it's one country, under one language, with one culture, pretty much, the U.S. still manages to be highly decentralized, highly individualistic, and you really can lead very, very different lives depending on the state you choose to live in, and even depending on the town in the state you choose to live in. And so America is a land of extremes, but on both sides. And that's what makes it absolutely fascinating. And one last point I wanted to talk about is this might be even due to how America is fundamentally built. Because if you see, where's the place where the hottest temperature in the world has ever been recorded? It's California. It's a Death Valley in the US. But at the same time, they have Alaska. At the same time, they have Hawaii, which is a tropical island. They have some of the most gorgeous mountain chains in the world, and yet they have Florida beaches. And it's not that common for one single country to have every single possible natural disaster. Like you could have tsunamis in the U.S., you could have earthquakes in the U.S., you could have hurricanes, you could have tornadoes, you could have fuck, you have deserts. You have literally every single type of nature related problem in the US. And that's not common. If you compare it to Europe, Europe barely has hurricanes. Not at all, really. When was the last time a tsunami famously hit Europe? Not that much. Tornadoes, unheard of. Even temperatures. If you Google any city in the US and you go to that little Wikipedia table of like max average highs, average lows, or max highs and max lows, what you're gonna notice is the spread in just generally any city in the US is gonna be so much bigger than the spread in most cities in Europe that you find. And I guess it, this nature phenomena speaks also to the American phenomena of being very, very extreme on things, being very, very different on things. And it speaks to the fact that America's right now definitely the most polarized country in the world. Brazil's pretty polarized as well. Uh, but yeah, I don't think anything compares to the US nowadays. And for the good or for the bad, that's what it is. America. It's a land of extremes. See you later.